there's a regulatory process associated with being able to, or being allowed to bring these products to the market. It's novel food, which means you have to go through a semi-legal process in any geography. I'm Peter Verstrate, co-founder of Mosa Meat, a company that's developing tissue engineering into a technology that can ultimately mass produce affordable meat. And my role in the company, next to being one of the founders, is COO.
COO, perfect. And how did you start this business? How did you get into this in the first place?
I got to quit. I mean, I come from the meat business, so cultured meat is, from that perspective, a very interesting technology as a real alternative to traditional meat. I got acquainted with the concept roughly 20 years ago when I met someone who introduced me to it, and was immediately fascinated by it. Was always too good to be true. It ticks every box. I mean, it outperforms, when it starts technically to work, that is, it outperforms meat in every aspect. So I couldn't find a good reason not to dive into this with both feet ahead, as we say in Dutch, and did. So I tempted, persuaded, whatever you call it, the company I was working for at the time, which was Sara Lee Foods, basically the meat operation of Sara Lee in Europe, to join an upcoming project, one of the first, well, probably the very first project into this research project into this technology. And we did, never let it go. So many of those 20 years I spent being employed somewhere, but doing this on the side, trying to raise interest, trying to raise, funding, what have you. But I guess things really started rolling when we, and by we I mean me and my co-founder Mark Post, who's the science guy, if you like, were approached by Sergey Brin, who's one of the founders of Google, and he had heard of this work, and he financed the production of a couple of hamburgers in 2013, which was a very, very manual and a very, very tricky thing to do at the time, but we did it, and they were very pricey, but well, the guy has deep pockets, so that was not a problem. And this was 2013, so probably looking back, that's when we presented this in a globally aired press conference / cooking show. And this was probably the point in time that inspired many, if not all, of the companies that are around today. There are like 30, 40 companies around today that work on this technology for the same reasons. We ourselves were founded in 2016, so we were an academic thing, but founded the company in 2016 because we realized that we needed many more resources than we had at the time to speed this up to a point where we'd be ready to go to the market in an overseeable amount of time, 3 to 5 years, say. So we made a plan to reflect that and founded the company and started looking for investors, which typically went as it goes. A few small ones, then a few bigger ones, and recently we closed our Series B. So we're now relatively comfortable for the next couple of years, and the Series B should bring us to the point where we're ready to actually go to the market. So including us having a industrial blueprint of a production unit fully developed.
So it sounds like the approach to this business has been, I suppose, in 2 phases. Sort of 20 years ago, when you were first talking about this, it was more around whether it was possible to really do. And then 2013, am I right in thinking that you were the first to cultivate a hamburger, in effect? So you sort of realized it's possible. And now am I right in thinking that the journey is all about how to mass produce that at in a cost-effective way?
Yeah, so that's quite well put. In fact, because 2013 was the proof of concept, it was not the proof of scalability yet. I mean, so it was just a scientific proof that we, humanity, he said, can do this. But the proof of scalability, so the proof that not only we can do it, but we can mass produce it and do it in a way that allows this to become a commodity at some point, which is, we think, is necessary for it to have impact. That's the next pivot point, probably, and we foresee that to happen maybe a year and a half to maybe 2.5 from today.
Absolutely. So when you first come up with this vision and when you're trying to change a whole industry, as you're looking to do, you do need people with deep pockets. Well-known people often help that. And you mentioned a couple of the people that have invested and been involved in the business. How do you reach out to these types of investors? How do you find them?
Yeah, again, not very helpful there because they reached out to us, actually. We almost literally, none of our current investors, we have reached out to them. And in almost none of the incidents where they ended up investing in us, did we ever formally pitch a deck to them. Usually, always, they knew very well what we were doing. They knew very well why we were doing it. They knew very well what the essence of the problem was that we were trying to solve. So we tended to dive quite deeply into our solution from scratch. So in that sense, we were a little bit different from your typical pitch where you introduce a problem, try to convince people that it is actually a problem, and then convince them that this is the solution to that problem. Those were sort of givens in most of the investor conversations that we had. And most of the investors already had spoken to specialists in the field to make sure that this wasn't just some crazy thought, but it was actually possible that this was going to happen. They were just looking for the best party to do that with them. So we ended up starting to speak somewhere halfway in what typically would have been a different process. And in our case, it was very helpful that we were sort of established as being the first ones to have done this. So we were at least perceived, and this is not only perceived, that is actually true. We had a head start. So we sort of knew the ins and outs of the basics of the technology. We knew where to look. We knew where the hurdles would be or had been. And we had a pretty good idea of timing ahead.
Sounds like you've had quite a unique, in a way, a unique approach to funding. Yes. And for the bulk of our audience, they sort of secured their Series A and are trekking now towards their Series B. So for you, in your experiences, how did those two raises differ for you? What was different with Series B to Series A?
Well, Series B was obviously a lot bigger. Series A was roughly 10 million. Series B was 70. That is actually the difference. So content-wise, it to be honest, Series A and Series B did not differ a lot. The exponential growth in output in scientific progress is only happening now that we have grown from the 10, 15, 20 people that we had in Series A to the 80, close to 90 people we have today. So we're growing really fast, and only now our output is justifying the investments that have been made in us. So content-wise, it's not very different. It's still a promise. It's maybe a little bit more of a solid promise, but it's still a promise, i.e. it's still a big risk from an investor point of view. But a risk with a huge, really huge upside. That is, I think, what interested investors in Series A. It's the mission. including Series B, but also the huge upside there is. I mean, if this really starts to happen, then you stepped on the train. You're going to enjoy the rest of your life.
So it certainly sounds like you've grown fairly quickly in terms of funding, team, and so on. So what are some of the growing pains when scaling at that rate?
Well, first of all, the obvious ones organizationally, although we seem to cope quite well. I mean, 80% of what we do is R&D. We're not in the market with a product. We don't have any sales. So we have very, very, very little marketing, sales, and promotional activities going on. We're really, and even then, probably more than I would have wanted to, but we're really focusing on the R&D and getting the process to a point where it's scalable. That's the asset that we're working on. In other words, it's just a bunch of overall pretty senior specialists, scientists. Those are the bulk of the company. That's a whole different mix than you would have if you were, going into a more commercial stage. A whole different type of exposure, what have you. So it's much more confined, if you like. So it's in that sense we have it easy. What probably is a little bit disproportional is the relationship between the amount of funding we got and the stage we are in. So we got, relatively speaking, we have a lot of funding in a very early stage, which is not very typical. And this is not a secret. I mean, investors know this. I mean, I'm not sharing anything tricky here with you. They know this very well. And this probably has to do with what I just said. There's a mission element to it, so there's more and more investors that are willing to take a risk related to that. But there's a huge upside. It's a $1.6 trillion market that is in bad need of disruption. I mean, not disruption for the sake of disruption as a fashionable word, but it's in bad need of change. Everybody is convinced that's, including the existing industry, are convinced that that's true. And there is not really a solution there yet. And if we do get to this point of proof of scalability, then we might have that solution in hand. And that's when people really start taking an interest. So yeah, it's a risk, but it's worth taking. Apparently that's and I can see that. I can see that.
And when growing at such a rate, I think things like legal compliance always become a bit of a challenge. So what are the real difficulties you found with that over the years?
Yeah, I guess legally the most challenging and most intricate processes ongoing right now are a vast number of NDAs or MTAs. So us collaborating with third parties on specific aspects of the technology, where we think it makes sense, or vice versa. That happens a lot, and that requires legal assistance. So and we have it. And regulatory. There's a regulatory process associated with being able to, or being allowed to bring these products to the market. It's novel food, which means you have to go through a semi-legal process in any geography, including the EU. So we have legal assistance there as well.
Absolutely. So we've spoken a lot about the R&D side of this and what it's like bringing this up to scalability. So realistically, for people that are not part of this industry, when can they expect that everyday people will be buying this sort of product in a supermarket?
5 to 10 years from today. Probably a little bit closer to 10 than to 5, but that's roughly the time frame. Partially, it's a pretty wide frame. I appreciate that, but partially it's, or really realize that, partially because of unknowns still ahead of us, but also partially because of the practicalities that are associated with bringing this to a mass market. So it's easy to imagine that happening, but going to the point, or from the point of proving that it is scalable to actually having it scaled, and compared to the size of the meat industry as it is today, that's a hell of a job. I mean, the practicalities of that alone are huge. So a lot of that is going to be depending on the amount of resources that are going to flow towards the development of this industry once we get to that point. And how much of that is going to happen in parallel and what have you. Are companies that have developed the technology, are they going to go for branded protected, self-produced concepts to the market? Or are they going to sell their technology and spread it out all over the world and, you know, have it start in 25, 50 places in parallel and anything in between? So it will depend on those kinds of scenarios. And yeah, I simply don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah, so still plenty of work to do then before we see it on shelves.
Yeah.
But certainly sounds like
Yes.
you've come a long way with it from 20 years ago when it was a real vision. So how has your role evolved as the founder of this business over time?
I started out, so there's two of us. I did this with Mark Post, who's the CSO currently. So we started off with me doing anything outside of the science, the business side, if you like, because I have some experience from my past coming from businesses or being associated with them. Having worked in larger businesses, you automatically, you know, get some experience in that level. So I started out as CEO. I did the Series A funding rounds. I helped build the basics of the organization, hired the first 20, 30, 40 people. And once we started to realize that Series B was going to be a different piece of cake money-wise, we hired someone more seasoned, more experienced with that, and turned it into a three-way thing. So we hired a CEO who's now on board and has been for a year and a half, and he's done the financing round basically. So he took that load off our shoulders, and Mark does the science side. I take care of operations, so I now take care of, and this is close to where I come from, work-wise. I take care of space. I take care of investments, budgets, all the side requirements that are needed for the scientists to be able to do their work.
And we've touched on what needs to happen in the bigger picture in terms of getting it to shelves over the next 5 to 10 years. Immediately over the next sort of 12 to 24 months, what are the real goals for the business?
To scale, so to make the science a little bit more robust, but mainly to scale to a point where we can start bringing products to the market at a small scale and start getting interaction with the market. So we plan to have sort of a mid-sized thing going on early next year, and somewhere in the year after that, grow towards a more industrial scale. And once we have that blueprint developed, any industrial unit that's going to function as a production hub will just be a multiplication of that blueprinted and developed production unit. So this is technology that from some point onwards will not scale up, but scale out.
So it certainly sounds like an exciting time for the business. So for those listening, where can they find out more about Mosa Meat?
Well, at our website, mosameat.com. That's where you can find our story, our vision, our ambitions.
Entrepreneurship is a very exciting area for us. Food entrepreneurship has huge social impact as well as animal welfare and sustainability benefits. Novel or innovative food where new food similar to meat are cultivated without the need for animals at all do present some distinct legal challenges. It's essential to protect your research and ideas from being exploited by third parties. You should protect your valuable intellectual property with patents and trademarks wherever possible. You will also need bespoke non-disclosure and material transfer agreements to ensure your work can't be used or stolen by the third parties that you deal with. And to get to a truly global market, you'll need to navigate diverse food regulations and agencies. That will mean demonstrating to the right people that your product is safe for human consumption, that it doesn't nutritionally disadvantage, and that it doesn't mislead as to what it is or does. So food law generally applies a precautionary principle to novel food. And as a result, you'll need to put a very strong safety case to a range of regulators and stakeholders in different jurisdictions. And here too, you should ensure your work isn't leaked or exploited as it's circulated to so many different agencies. That's something your advisor should steer you through. Their role is to effectively protect your intellectual property and enable you to scale while safely accessing global markets. They should succeed when you succeed.